Less Traveled podcast. I'm your host, Hilary Haron, and today we have with us Savannah Simms, Automotive extraordinaire. Welcome, Savannah.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So I basically gave your name, but if you could give a brief overview of your job and your background and what you do would be amazing.
I grew up working in dealerships and kind of worked my way through the different roles. And my last role in automotive retail in a store was a general manager. And now I'm in the stage of building that new dream. So I'm calling myself an experiential architect in this stage.
That's the literal best job title I have ever heard for anything ever.
I will say you hand a business card and they kind of scratch their head, but I think it's great because then it opens a conversation.
100%. See, good marketing already. So for those of you who don't know, Savannah is a friend of mine and we met through the industry, through me being a little bit of a creeper on LinkedIn, but it has been kind of a life-changing friendship for me. And this year, we were talking and she's like, you know what, Hilary, I'm doing this like year of yes. And I'm like, well, what the hell does that mean? So I'm going to let her walk us through a little bit of the year of yes and how that has transformed her life.
Our friendship has meant so much to me. I've never found someone I'm more alike, but spend so little time with in person. And so I'm very grateful that we've had you to pave the way for us as women in the industry. And so what taught me a lot and applying that was when our auto group decided to separate and our family left. And calling you, I'll never forget, I was in line at In-N-Out Burger picking up 50 burgers from my store. And I'm like, I need to tell you something. And you're like, I need to tell you something. And the separation was happening at the same time. And just that isolating feeling of being a part of something for so long and you thinking that these are really your community and this really is your family, to all of a sudden it really was just business. That feeling was really difficult. And you look inward and you're like, what did I do? What could I have done differently? How could I have done a better job? And you know that you left it all on the court, right? You did your best. So the year of saying yes, picked up and moved across the country somewhere very dark and cold for most of the year, which was a huge change. I'd spent most of my time in California and Colorado. So sunshine was a big part of my life. And I didn't know that I needed that, which was an interesting part of the yes journey. So saying yes was throwing spaghetti at a wall, quite literally, right behind you here, and figuring out what I wanted to do. And so I got a call to go to, this was the beginning of the year, so February of this year, got a call to fly out to Los Angeles and pitch this show that you and I have been talking about for years, Behind Her Drive. And this would be like a mini series, limited pilot. And so this was with a development group. And it was really interesting. They said, don't prepare anything. So of course, overachiever.
Prepared something.
I made like a 1.5-minute sizzle reel using ChatGPT of little characters of me going around the world and telling stories about the women that came before us, because the women today are doing amazing things. But why don't we take what we learned from them? Because we're not in the history books yet.
Right.
Highlight that. Where are we today? And what are the women today doing to forge tomorrow? And so that was a humbling experience because it was terrible. Had never pitched a show, didn't know what to do. I thought it went okay. But by the end, they were saying we needed more drama and we needed more entertainment. And this was certainly not made for Bravo. This was definitely Discovery Channel, dirty jobs, if you will, going into the factories and into the studios and going through that process. So that was an interesting saying yes, but it was a great experience.
It's so funny they say that there's not enough drama because let me tell you, coming from a family business, there is no place with more drama.
Right.
Unless it's literally scripted by Bravo, like you said.
Yeah, I think it would be great. I think it's a great show idea, getting into the dealerships of the women, but also like everything from the factory and the design, the aftermarket, the racing, modifications. I mean, it would have been very fun. So maybe someday, but that was a great example of just getting out of my comfort zone and saying yes to something. And that was one of the first times where I'd come up with an idea and someone else wanted it. Because I felt like in my career, it was always coming up with an idea and everyone was behind it because they supported me, not because they supported the idea.
Yeah.
So like hosting yoga classes in my showroom.
That's
Um,
amazing, by the way.
it was very fun and our customers loved it, but I think it was very much like this was Savannah's vision and we
Mhm.
support her. So this idea of creating something someone wanted, getting that call, that was big. I'll never forget the little vintage tweed matching suit that I wore and the tall boots walking down, like
It
it was a
was
great experience.
fire.
It was a good time. And then moving on, just, other examples of just saying yes, being invited to speak internationally. And it was funny, you and I talking about traveling in the industry. What was traveling like for you, Hilary? What were those plans like?
They were, well, for the most part, they were made, especially if you're traveling with your manufacturer, right? Like, so if you're working in a store, for people who aren't automotive related, if you work in a dealership and you're going to a training, a meeting, a launch, they coordinate everything, almost down to your flights. And even some companies, the larger ones, the Toyotas, the Fords, sometimes will coordinate those flights for you. But you have an itinerary, you have everything to follow. And I think your experience was probably largely the same until this one.
This one was really different. I thought that I would do a much longer trip, and as it got closer, I got more and more nervous, which I've never really been nervous traveling before. As
Mm-hmm.
you know, we're on the road quite frequently, but we always know who's going to be there when we get there. This
Mm-hmm.
was very different. So, flew to London. I was only going to be there for 36 hours because there was trouble getting there. And I was staying in a Marriott hotel. So I thought, like, this is a good plan. This is going to be great. And the entire time, people were coming in my room. Like I felt like I was at a hostel. And again, I've never been afraid traveling because I always know who was down the hall, who I could call. I'm young. I'm not afraid. But I wasn't a backpacker, right?
Mm-hmm.
We didn't study abroad. We were at our dealerships. And so I cannot believe that I'm 28 years old and I'm now afraid to travel alone. That was something I never thought I'd ever feel. But I'm in
It,
my room
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
and they're coming in my room and
I mean,
there's no
that
latch.
adds like a whole nother level of doing something you've never done before, doing it outside of like the normal itinerary kind of capsule. And then, especially being a woman, having somebody have access to your hotel room. I mean, horrifying.
It was so strange. And at the same time, we were dealing with the largest cyber attack in automotive history. And so through the nights, I was getting calls to work on things for the store. And so that was an interesting time. And the topic that I spoke on, it was an electric vehicle conference. And I kind of have Europe on a gold pedestal of like how to do EV. But going there and saying yes opened my eyes to the grass is always greener on the other side and they have so much work to do. But then on my way there, I'm walking down the street and all the parking spots had these pillars that had EV chargers coming out of them on the streets. I'm like, this is awesome. And then you go into the conference and you hear the real thing. So that
Oh,
was a really interesting example of just kind of saying yes and having a job that allowed me to explore over the last year. But I think
that's
this
phenomenal.
idea of just creating and bringing ideas and then volunteering a lot of my time, which has been a very different experience. And now they're coming to you for help. And now they want your ideas that you don't even have yet. Right.
And when you talk about volunteering, in some ways they want them for free.
All the time. But here's the problem is that they flow.
Mhm.
Right. And so that's a big challenge is that I can't stop them from coming out because that's who
Mhm.
I am. And I think that's why you and I are so similar is you always want to help people, right? You always want to up level and upskill and help those around you grow. But as those come out, you're like, wait a second, I think there's something here. I think there's a business here. It may not be cars, but it's in here. And so going from selling a physical product
Mhm.
to a service is something that I had to wrap my head around. So it was just continuing to say yes. So creating something that others wanted. Got a call from a luxury manufacturer that they wanted a gift to give a client.
Mhm.
And it was something super simple, but I took it beyond that, right? Always go larger
Yeah.
and dream big and hired a photographer to come out. And we threw a party on a yacht and photographed the whole thing to build a beautiful coffee table book, which hasn't come out yet. But that was really fun. Someone wanted your idea, they wanted to do it, and you just needed to build that portfolio. I realized that's not the future, but it was a great example of saying yes.
I have a little question about that. I know that there's more yes things, so I don't want to stop like the yes flow. Um, But one of the things that occurred to me is that if you're looking down and like grinding, right? Nose to the grindstone, just kind of going through the motions that you think you're supposed to, which our industry really is kind of known for. It has like a cadence to it, and nobody wants to go outside that cadence. But if you hadn't been looking up, if you hadn't had your perspective, some of these opportunities you would have never even seen as an opportunity, right? Like it would have been like, oh, that was a funny conversation. So like your mindset alone open doors for you, right?
Yes. And I think the way I walk into any business, from a coffee shop to a restaurant, to a spa, my brain thinks very differently. And that was when I started accepting that I wasn't fighting it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And in automotive, we have every month is the same. It's always different. Every day is different, but every month is the same.
Yeah.
So we start off, the first few days are hard. You're fixing your financial statement, closing out your prior month, and setting up your new month. And then the end of the month is a grind. And in the middle, you have like 3 or 4 days when you're doing tweaks, right? And getting your business back to normal. And so
we used to call that hero to zero. And it's like being on a hamster wheel.
And zero to hero. Mm-hmm. So, right. It's kind of going back and forth in that cycle. And so training my brain to think differently and be like, what day is it? Because before I'd be able to tell you how many hours it was until the end of the month. So being just a little eyes wide open. The other piece that was different was not only being able to take something from a conversation and being like, oh, that was fun, to now thinking about networking opportunities and how can they help me and how can I serve them? Mm-hmm. And the relationships that I've made are very different. Think of myself more now as a resource.
That reciprocal relationship is something that I think I've always really respected about you. Is you go in and you're like, what can I get out of this? And then what can I give back to it also? And I don't know that specifically in our industry or my former industry, I guess, I don't think everybody goes into it that way. A lot of times people walk in and they are not even thinking what they can get out of it. They're just kind of almost there begrudgingly. So I love the perspective that you bring, and that you encourage other people to look at it the same way.
Well, thank you. I think attitude is everything. And so looking at how is this going to affect us today, tomorrow, and a year from now is the most important thing. But I've also noticed over the last year, the people that you're attracting are a lot like yourself, but they're where I want to be. Mm-hmm. And they're entering it with, how can I help you? And that's been a big transition.
It has been. And, something that we talked about previously that I want to just touch on briefly is something that you and I experienced similarly, where we fought really hard and worked really hard to get to this like dream job, right? Well, what we thought was our dream job, and it turned out to kind of be the worst nightmare. And navigating that from an identity perspective, and then continually trying to show up in our industry and address it kind of a different way, to kind of change the way other people experience it. Mm-hmm. That like turning that pain into power, or pain into progress, or, whatever, in whatever you morph that pain into. I mean, you mentioned that you moved really across the country at a time that was kind of painful. So how did you navigate all that, like kind of within yourself? Where did you draw the strength?
I have this one moment that like even right now like makes me choked up, but I landed at O'Hare and I had a duffel bag backpack, a Patagonia backpack on. I told you earlier I'm not a backpacker like over in Europe, but here we are. We're moving
like to fly. It's so much easier with a backpack.
So I'm walking through here and I have so much stuff, and I remember there's, the neon lights that are like the tube that you go down in the airport. And I remember going airport. Down, it's the best. I'm going through this tunnel and I had a connecting flight. And I remember looking up at the lights going down the tunnel and feeling like I had just escaped, like an abusive, like restrictive. I could feel like the weight of chains off my body, that I knew everything was going to be okay. And the chance that I took moving here was crazy. It was very quick. It was very sudden. And I didn't tell anyone for months that I left.
Well, And for those of you who don't know, like this topic gets me jacked up because from a dealership perspective, specifically from a family business perspective, you don't, that's not something that people do. Like, right. You just, it's not a thing people do. You grind it out and you just kind
You're
of keep showing up.
you're born and you're given a map, and here's your
Yes.
timeline, and you have every decision mapped out for you. And aside from, what were we going to study in school, there were a couple different options if you were going to go to college or you were going to go to trade school. But in terms of having a family business, in that, from the age of 6, I was wearing a name tag. So I
Mhm.
knew I was going to go to college and I was going to explore myself and what was I going to do. And I loved advertising. I did internships that were adjacent to the end goal.
Mhm.
But the end goal was always to run a dealership and then to run an auto group. And so I was very, very lucky to be given the opportunity to run a store. And it was a phenomenal store, but it was one that was very challenged. It had just been through some pretty sticky situations and kind of traumatic events. And then it was given to me, and I was so green. I cannot even tell you, looking at a financial statement, where I was versus where I left. But going through all those trials and tribulations and all those challenges made me so much better. I cannot imagine having not gone through that. Just, I'm glad that I didn't get something that was a piece of cake, plug and play and rock.
Mhm.
Had I not faced that adversity, I don't know what would have happened. I don't know who I would be today. But I look back and I hear recordings of myself, or I see photos, and I just can see the pain because I know how I felt. And it's interesting. I recorded a lot of how I was feeling through a coaching program I was in. And there
Mhm.
was an intake form and process. So they interview people in my life. And then it was all the work throughout it, which was about 20 pages a week, single spaced. And then the end, kind of conclusion and summary, how did I feel? And I trained a bot on it
Mhm.
so that I can talk to myself when I'm down, of
Mhm.
how to think clearly and articulately and relate back to my, the teachings, and that it's going to be okay. You've been there, you're not there anymore. Look now. And like, if I hadn't moved, I wouldn't have that clarity or the free time, honestly, to go and build something like that where it can keep me on track.
Keeping ourselves on track is a hard thing. And again, this for me relates to automotive and family business. And I say that because I have another family business that I work in because when everything, it's almost like playing whack-a-mole all the time. And you get so off track. You run to every fire. But there's a better way, right? I mean, it feels like you've kind of discovered a better way to show up in the world.
Family business, like, I've never been more proud of something in my life. And I think that you can relate to that as well.
100%.
But then I realized that I might have been able to give more of my gifts to the world if I created my own business
Mhm.
and I created my own path. That does not mean I cannot support a family business and I
Yeah.
cannot give some of my gift and some of my time and my energy and love to them, because I wouldn't be where I am today without all of those people that work in our family business. It's more about them than it is about us. And then if I continued to give 100% of myself to that, they would really only be getting this much, where the rest of the
Mhm.
world can have this much. And that's been the most beautiful part of the last year of saying yes.
So like the personal growth, being able, I see like this visual in my mind. And again, it's the word reciprocal is coming up because you're able to give out so many wonderful things and get them back. So they're not going into, kind of the abyss, right? And it's been really fun to kind of watch the different projects that you've worked on. A couple of them I really want to mention. I'm just not sure if you're okay with it. So I'm going to
Go for it.
let
You're
you
fine.
mention which ones you want. But that have garnered like international attention just by you being you and creative in the way that you are in this space.
Well, thank
And
you.
I think that's phenomenal. And something that you and I have done together is participated in these, what we call in the automotive industry, a next gen program, which is, for a concise definition, basically dealer kids or dealer successors getting together, sharing ideas and best practices.
So, where you are going with this idea of kind of being involved in the next gen business and NADA or our state associations and coming together to have hard conversations and lean on each other for support. I can visualize exactly where I was sitting when I have called you in moments of crisis or of pain or of pride and excitement. I remember a specific day and the book you recommended sitting outside of my house in San Francisco and the amount of fear in my body and how coming to you, I felt so comforted. Or talking about succession planning and what do we do? And then how do we carry ourselves when our family members make other decisions that we may not agree with?
Mm-hmm.
And so that has been an interesting part of the journey of automotive is very few industries are multi-generational to the level that we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really, really special. I believe that automotive is really the foundation of America. And it's one of those industries. There's very few. And so came up with this idea to put together a video project to share how much we love this and how important it is that we preserve this. The concept of the dealer body. I remember years ago, you had asked me to write an article about it. And I compared factory farming to ranching in the West, right? But coming up with ideas and then people wanting them, going back to that and kind of the saying yes, bringing forward this video project and how afraid I was. And it turned out beautifully. And being able to share that with you is really special.
I mean, I think that that's amazing. And having a place or having people, so my story, I struggled a lot with my identity. I struggled a lot finding my place in the industry. I struggled with almost not being allowed in certain places. So I started really searching in kind of unusual places that most people my age and or my gender um, don't look, but found traction in them. And I think that kind of goes back to your year of saying yes. In the moment, when I was asked to go to Washington, D.C. and do some lobbying in 2015, I had talked myself completely out of it. No way. They don't really want me. Even my dad, who will be mortified when I say this out loud, he really didn't want me to go. He was like, it's not necessary. You need to be here, which is a very typical response from like a dealer dad.
Who's going to run the store while you're gone?
Right.
You're always
Exactly.
on vacation.
Well, it's like, and it's almost like, I don't know what you think people do, but you put people in positions of power and empower them to run their departments the way that they see fit. They do not need somebody standing over them all the time. They need to have the freedom to make those decisions.
They'll never grow.
Like relating that kind of back to your like year of yes and all these new creative things, harnessing that into like one funnel, I think is incredible. I think that it serves you well, like you being you serves you well, right? And having the freedom to do that. So the decisions that you've made, the yeses that you've made, has that reiterated and reinforced that this was the best thing for you?
There were a lot of moments where I was afraid and I was like, I have no idea how I'm going to support myself with all of these projects because it was always just, oh, absolutely. And taking them and understanding I needed to grow a portfolio. But you have to remember, these are so different. This is video, this is photo, this is reaching out about different laws and policies and programs for EVs. Like all of these were across the board. And so a lot of feedback that I was given from people that care about me is, why don't we pick one thing? I remember I had a coach that had said that. And I had a friend that had said that. And then, your significant other is like, okay, well, are they paying you? What are they paying you? And I'm like, well, I still have my other job. I'm, doing 50 hours a week in my normal job. Well, how are you going to sustain? Like, you're going to burn yourself out. But the joy of working from home, right? You have more time. I can work efficiently and get it done. But there were times where I was like, we're not getting anywhere. And then all of a sudden it clicked. And so it's been really great having like official roles with friends' businesses and not sharing them with the world has been really special. My relationship with my significant other was private for 9 months and it was awesome because we got to like really fall in love and build a foundation of a relationship. And then same thing with moving across the country. So I kind of have this like little Hannah Montana and Miley Cyrus thing going on of like what everyone thinks is going on and what's really going on, but they're both authentic.
Mm-hmm.
But I still get to have this buffer to make sure that something is right before I come public with all of it. So if that answers the question, but I think the common thread in that they're all different has been something I've been ashamed of or nervous. When you ask me, Savannah, what are you doing these days? And I'm like, that's $1 million question. And so getting excited and going down rabbit holes and just accepting that the common thread is that I'm passionate about it.
Mm-hmm.
And the integration between what I'm doing for a living and what my passions are have been that common thread.
And that's the dream and the thing that I think has been missing in society for so long. And I see this shift from people, especially post-COVID, where people had a lot of time to reflect, like, what's the point? Why would I accept that? So much more access to information. People are more mobile. And this is like something I say all the time. So if anybody has listened to more than one of these episodes, they've heard me say that. But why stay somewhere that's uncomfortable or you're not appreciated or doesn't align with you? It could be as simple as it just doesn't feel right when you have access to all these other things that do feel right, that you can turn into the next thing. So if you're comfortable sharing with the group or with anybody who's listening, what's next for Savannah?
It's going to be interesting. It's a lot of things, which is fun, but there was a moment recently where a company that's about to launch had come forward and had asked for help planning an event. And I said, well, I'm a very amateur event planner, but I've planned a lot of them and for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's next? Going to be going into more of the creative side. So there's going to be some agency work going on, and I've been head of business development for the Clearly Collective.
Mm-hmm.
So we're creating bespoke silk scarves that reflect your brand story. So continuing to do that. I'm going to be getting my MBA in 2025.
Woo, girl.
So excited, and lots of content creation. So I'm excited. I think the biggest thing of we had to find the common thread. It's just to find myself more and more and continue tuning out my self-doubts. Last year, I'd created a video that was about not caring what other people thought about me. And the things that were said were wicked. I don't care what they say anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But my own self-doubt is just believing in myself and continue saying yes. But now we do have to be more selective because those opportunities keep coming in, and having the privilege of being more selective there.
How do you tune those things out? What are, or if you don't mind sharing, a couple like practices that you do?
Sometimes I have to find the fact of why it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
I can give an example. It's quite graphic, but I think it's a really great one. Standing next to a CEO of a manufacturer and another dealer saying, you don't have a penis. Why are you here? And in the same breath, he says, oh, that's cute. You're going to the academy. One day you'll be a general manager. And responding back, I actually am a general manager.
Mm-hmm.
And in my head, I can't say this because I always want to make sure that no matter where I am and what I do, it's going to come back. And so in my head, I'm like, I'm placed 25 stores above you in terms of rankings year to date. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I've been there for a year and a half, and this is how we're doing. So sometimes like my sass, I do keep it internally, but just reminding myself of what the truth is to what they're saying. And then always asking for feedback and keeping yourself in check. Because I think humility is the biggest thing. When exiting my job, I was told by someone that I really respected, hopefully this is the knock to the ego that you need, and you'll come back.
Oh, well,
that
sounds like somewhere I would never visit again.
Right. And they weren't saying like, come back to the company or anything like that, but hopefully this stage of growth will be really good for you.
Oh, well, that's good. See, and it's all about how you take it, right? So you're my friend. So I take it very defensively, like, oh,
of course I did too. And I was like, wait a second, ego, I've been sitting here crying saying I need help. Mm-hmm. Like I'm struggling in this role, and we've been working our butts off. We're sleeping 3 hours a night, like ego. I got a lot of room for improvement. And so then you put yourself in check, right? And you say, like, what could I have done better? Where have I appeared to be this? And then constantly asking for feedback. I know I do that with you all the time of like, how is that perceived? And what grumblings have you heard, if any? And how can I do a better job
Mhm.
to represent women like us better? How can you lift other people up and how can you preserve that image?
And something that's always impressed me about you is that you can take anything that is either not favorable or it's a perspective thing. So it's not quite like positive. It's not, I don't want to say you like put a positive spin on it, but that is what it is. Um, but you articulate it in such a way that it's not like you're sugarcoating it to put it back out there. And I've always really thought that that was very impressive in mostly because I have a really hard time doing it myself, and the world needs more of that. Kind of reframing something in a less negative way, and shedding some more light on it. You're very curious, I think, and I think that that is amazing. And I am now curious, what advice would you give to other women that are feeling very stuck and not sure where to go? We'll say women in the automotive world. They're feeling a little bit stuck. What piece of advice would you give them?
I think the spin on positivity on bad situations is a coping mechanism, but it has gotten me to where I am today. So I'm grateful we've built that muscle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my advice to other women in the industry is to stay curious and continue learning, because if you study twice as hard as they do,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have to fight 4 times as hard to be in their position. And so stay curious and be kind to each other, because there's women in all levels of the industry. And you notice those that reach their hand out and help one another go so much further. There's very few women in the industry. I think I can only name maybe one that I ever had a problem with, because you always approach it with such kindness and support of how can we help each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that one example, I actually went to them and I said, hey, that was really out of character. Are you okay? When they had said something that was unkind, and I'm like, that's not you. Like, that's not how we are as women in this business. How can I help you? After what she had said was so hurtful. So just
How did
always,
that tell me how that played out? I'm curious how that played out, because it can a lot of women in this industry go out of their way to try to be men. And that doesn't work. That they It doesn't work. So how did you approaching that in a curious way? How did that work out?
well, you have to be careful because after hours of all events, like there's always a social aspect.
Mm-hmm.
I stopped drinking 3.5 years ago for that reason. I
Good
wore
for
a
you.
ring on my ring finger for years because I never wanted to cross that line. I always wanted to be feminine, relatable, emotionally charged to just keep myself in motion forward and not be a blank slate. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to be I didn't want to be a robot. I wanted to be authentic. And if you know me, I have no filter whatsoever, but I'll always keep it just as politically correct as I need to, and always having that North Star, where my father's the opposite. He is no filter to the max. But that generation, it's okay. With us, there it's more critical. I also think gender plays a role in that as well.
Yeah.
But in that situation, a woman had been out drinking. I had gone to bed very early and I was working in my hotel room, and she had been saying things that were factually incorrect and extremely unkind. And it was very much trying to be that like guy's girl,
Mm-hmm.
and also kind of crossing a few boundaries in the way there. And I was so charged because I was like, wait, I've been nothing but kind. Like, how could someone do that? We're not accustomed to that, because the people we surround ourselves with are very different. And I remember shaking, sitting in this office, and I was like, I need to say something. And so I pulled her into the hallway and confronted her. And I said, this isn't in your character. This doesn't align with your organization's values, our group, what we were there to do, our group's values. And I really want to help you. Is something wrong? And what can I do? And I don't think she'd ever been called out before. And because, when you kind of lower your voice into like this juvenile voice, and like you can kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
that's not going to cut it in this environment. Like, we're
Yeah.
face to face. And she owned it. She apologized profusely. She went to the bathroom and threw up.
Oh,
And we
okay.
continued on with our day. And I got back to my office a few days later and there were flowers on the table. But the respect from everyone else that had heard that firsthand, and to know that we weren't going to condone that. And when someone has a bad day or someone makes a poor choice, we're not going to continue judging them for that. We're going to just continue reaching our hand out to help.
So that actually leads me into something I wanted to ask also about mentorship. Mentorship is it's something I'm super passionate about. And I know that it is something that is close to your heart too. So how are you continuing on that kind of mentorship journey through all kind of the changes or the new experiences that you're experiencing?
Mentorship looks a lot different now than it did when I was in a dealership. I think the hardest part is we were always chasing a number, and I could come and bring you into my office on the first of the month and say, what are our goals?
Mm-hmm.
And we can check in every week. It's a little different now. In terms of peer mentorship, that's probably the most of what I'm seeing, and supporting each other. So it's almost like I have this board of advisors within my life and I run these ideas by them, and vice versa. And so I would say peer mentoring is prominent. And then on another mentoring level, I have a young gal in high school who's going through it, and she lives in Arizona, and helping her rebuild her closet and build her style. And I'm like, no fashionista. I just love vintage clothes.
Mm-hmm.
So I connected her with a personal stylist, and we've been going through how do you want to present yourself to the world, and helping her find those pieces, and having those calls of how do you interact with the world around you. So it's a little different than it was, but I hope through building a business here locally and being a part of a community, I can get more involved in helping women with mentorship in their careers. The women's shelter with clothing, resume prep, and all of that. But
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be a little different than it was. How are you? I mean, obviously you're coaching on a regular basis and you have your podcast,
Mm-hmm.
but how are you mentoring beyond that?
I think peer mentorship is a big deal. It's been kind of a big deal for me. And again, that was that was born of feeling very isolated and very lonely and very uncomfortable. And if I was feeling it, then I knew other people had to be feeling it. So try to make space for people in the world, and make a safe space for them to be candid, to say what they need to say what they want to say, and then just leaving it there. And knowing that as a mentor, my job isn't to fix people, it's just to give feedback. And they can do with that feedback what they want. And that's been a little bit of a growth journey for me because, again, for the
Yeah.
same reasons, I decided how I wanted to show up and what was important to me. And then wanted to say, okay, well, this is what you should do. So getting rid of the shoulds has been a project for the last year for me. It's been very hard. But taking should out of the narrative.
One of the
And
things I think you do is you hold up a mirror for them and you help them identify what those things are. You're coaching them to the point where they recognize it so that they can act on it.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's very
You've
kind.
removed the should, so don't be critical. But
Mhm.
one thing I've been really critical of myself is really leaning into the way my brain works. And you and I have talked about this.
Mhm.
How do we accept that? Because before we had to fit in a box
Yes.
for a very long time.
And it
And
didn't matter how your brain worked. It didn't matter what was wrong. It didn't matter if you were sick. You had very specific expectations.
and your brain was programmed to be their brain. There's no other way to do it. This is how it's going to be. And you try and put spins on things, but it was different. And allowing my brain moving from Silicon Valley or San Francisco,
Mhm.
where weird is the normal,
Yeah.
moving somewhere different, um, where it's a little more single-minded focus, being over here and over there and over there. We talked about the idea previously of like being on the spectrum a little bit,
Mhm.
and leaning into just who you are. I think that that's the biggest piece of advice, is to bring who you are and integrate those two worlds. If I had done that in my previous role, I think I would have been a lot more successful. I remember when my boss one day sat me down and he's like, you just need to be you. Like, that's why you were you earned this position and you were selected for the position is because of who you are, not who you think you need to be. And I remember that day so clearly. I wish I had done that. Someone recently said, please let your weird shine brightly and openly. It's not weird when it comes from a place of caring and good. You are in a unique position of being able to give confidence to others and be more themselves simply by being you. With greatness comes great responsibility, and your greatness superpower has amazing potential to help others simply by letting the world see you be you. Few people can lead with joy as their primary. And I just think that that's such a great way of like, the only way to change the world is to be myself. Because the more I fight it, the more backwards I go in this journey. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, we can check in a year and see if we're still saying yes, or are we saying more maybes?
Yeah, like, whoa, okay, overwhelmed. I'm penciling that in right now in a year, putting it on the calendar. I know that there are many more topics that I want to delve into with you. And so I think we'll definitely have to get some more episodes on the calendar because I'm very interested to hear kind of how this next phase and kind of follow along with how this next phase goes. I know I'm going to, but I would love to share that with our listeners too, if you're willing.
Well, thank you. I'm excited for what you have ahead and being able to be a part of that in whatever way possible, and being able to partner in some of these ventures, because I wouldn't be where I am if I didn't have a Hilary Haron before me. So thank you for opening all the doors and allowing us to walk.
That was a very generous compliment. Stop it.
It's real. It didn't exist before. It's interesting in one region, like, yes, like my grandmother sold cars. Yes, my mom sold cars, but that's very different than the community that you built. And by the time we got there, it was so normal. And now you go into any meeting, whether it was an organization you were a part of or not, and that name gets brought up, and there's not a face that's not just ear to ear grinning, right, and smiling. So I'm very proud of you and the impact you made.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. It's one of those where I'm like, it's not how it is. Stop it. I can't.
Yeah, I wish it was uglier, but that's really it. There's nothing juicy about it. It's great.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that very much. And I appreciate your time very much and being here with us, sharing vulnerably and candidly. And I look forward to navigating the rest of this journey with you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
A huge thank you to our incredible guests for sharing their stories, wisdom, and breaking down barriers with us. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Your support means the world to me and helps spread the word about the amazing women paving the road less traveled in male-dominated industries. If you have suggestions for a future guest or topic you'd like me to explore, please reach out on social media. I'd love to hear from you. Follow me on your favorite social platform for updates and behind the scenes. Keep pushing boundaries, challenging norms, and lifting each other up.